We will now begin our program. Okay.
We are the Halusa Nation.
Toronto, what's up? My name's Two Man. This is Bear Witness. We're a tribe called Red. Y'all ready to get this party started? One more time, louder. Are you ready to get this party started?
Confronted by the alive nation, the subjects and the citizens see the material religions through trauma and numb. Nothing is related. All the things of the earth and in the sky have energy to be exploited. Even themselves, mining their spirits into souls. We are the tribe that they cannot see. We live on an industrial reservation. We are the Halusa Nation. We have been called the Indians. We have been called Native American. We have been called hostile. We have been called pagan. We have been called militant. We have been called many names. We are the Halusa Nation. We are the human beings. The callers of names cannot see us, but we can see them.
Okay, thank you. Welcome again. Am I on mute? Okay, so thank you and welcome again, and thank you for being with us tonight. My name is Fatima Mohammed, and I'm the Executive Director of Labour Community Services. Labour Community Services and the Equity Committee of Toronto and York Region Labour Council are proud to host and put together this event since 2005, recognizing the amazing work Labour activists do in human rights and social justice, just as Bromley Lloyd Armstrong did. On behalf of Labour Community Service and the Equity Committee, thank you all for being here to support us and one another. At a time when it feels like we are at the threat of constantly being divided and discredited, our perseverance in standing up for what's right and just for all is so important. Coming together is a reminder that we all still hold hope. I would now like to hand it over to Abdi, Chair of the Labour Community Services Board, Secretary of Toronto and York Region Labour Council, and Secretary Treasurer of Canadian Union of Postal Workers, Toronto Local. Abdi, welcome. And you are on mute.
Thank you, Sister Fatima. Good evening, sisters and brothers, comrades. I would like to thank all our guests and this year's sponsors for your support. We cannot emphasize enough the importance of being able to dedicate efforts to bring awareness and fight for basic human rights and social justice. Till this day, as you know, many are facing systemic barriers, racism and discrimination, inequalities, and hate. We have seen the tragic impact ignorance can have into people like you and me and our communities, simply because we may be seen as different. We come here today to remember Bromley's work, his activism, and his friendship, as well as celebrate the strides we have made for a better tomorrow. Sisters and brothers, with our panel and award recipient today, we are witnesses to the dedication and hearts many of us have in fighting injustice. We are inspired by all of you here today for the 17th annual Bromley Armstrong Gala, walking on the path Bromley and so many others like yourself. Albert David. Thank you, sisters and brothers. I will turn back to Sister Fatima for some virtual housekeeping.
Okay, thank you. So the usual is this meeting will be recorded and shared online once the program has ended. Everyone's mic will be on mute. Speakers will be asked to unmute themselves when it's their time to present. You are invited to respectfully engage in the conversation within the chat, which can be accessed at the bottom panel of your screen. We expect everyone to feel safe, free from harassment of any form. The chat and video will be monitored, and anyone who disrespects others will be removed from the event. If for any reason we have technical issues or need to end the program, we will resume at another date and follow up with an email communication. For any other concern, please email info@laborcommunityservices.ca. I would like now to hand to Sister Judith Logan Junop, Treasurer of Labor Community Services, Labor Co-Chair of the United Way Greater Toronto, Yes It Matters campaign cabinet member, and former Vice President of IFPTE Local 160 to do the land acknowledgement. Welcome, Sister Judith.
Thank you, Faduma. I would like to begin by honoring the land that we're on, which has been the site of human activity since time immemorial. It is the traditional territories of the Huron-Wendat, Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and most recently, the Mississaugas of the Credit River First Nations. These nations in the land were subject to the One Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement to peaceably share and care for the land and its resources. Other Indigenous nations, Europeans, and newcomers were invited into this covenant in the spirit of respect, peace, and friendship. Today, Takaranto, known as Toronto, is under Treaty 13 and is home to many Indigenous nations across Turtle Island, including the Inuit and the Métis. I am mindful of broken covenants and strive to make this right with the land and each other. We are all treaty people. Many of us have come here as settlers, immigrants, newcomers in this generation and past. I'd like to also acknowledge those of us who came here involuntarily, particularly as a result of the transatlantic slave trade. And so we honor and pay tribute to the ancestors of African origin and descent.
Okay, so thank you, Sister Judith. Our MC for tonight, for this evening, is Keith Meneses. I hope I pronounced your name correctly. Keith is a community labor and community activist and co-chair of the Equity Committee of Toronto and York Region Labor Council, where he has been an active member for the past 10 years. Keith's work in human rights also extends to his role as chairperson of Steelworkers Toronto Area Council Human Rights Committee, a position he has held for the past 5 years. His ability to provide gentle and decisive leadership has seen him hold the office of President and Vice President of Steelworkers Local 9197. A firm believer in acting for change, Keith was a candidate in the 2014 and 2018 Richmond Hill City Council election. Welcome, Keith, and he will be the MC for tonight. So, Keith, welcome.
Thank you, Faduma. I'm so happy to be with you all. Our theme for tonight is Our Moment, our movement. You are encouraged to engage in the chat. What does our movement mean to you? We will also be announcing the 8 winners for the raffle throughout the event. Inspired by this activism, Bromley Armstrong dedicated his life to in breaking down barriers, seeking equality and justice for all, and striving to make a lasting and impactful difference in people's lives. Our movement encourage us to reflect on how we got to where we are today and how we choose to move forward. Our panel of speakers will expand on their firsthand experiences, and then we'll recognize the exceptional work being done by activists in the labor movement to take steps in making each day better than the one before. This year, the Bromley Armstrong Award alumni was formed. For the first time, previous recipients of the award were invited to come together and connect virtually. It was inspiring, to say the least, to see the magnitude of the work everyone represented and continues to engage in. This following video shares reflections from some of the alumni on Bromley's legacy.
Brother Bromley Armstrong was a giant of a trade union activist, community activist.
He was my friend. He was like an uncle. He was a mentor.
My dad came from Kingston, Jamaica, the birthplace of Bromley Armstrong. Bromley's work in the late 50s and 60s to change the racist Canadian immigration laws continued to connect to my life.
At a time when to talk about systemic racism was unheard of. They were actually dismantling systemic racism, dealing with institutions, with powerful organizations that were practicing discrimination and challenging those directly.
The different acts of everyday resistance, the sit-in test, be it in Dresden, be it in a housing accommodation in Toronto, those are smart, creative and strategic moves that expose the absurdity and ugliness of racism and exclusion.
What Bromley and others did, it wasn't for them as individuals. It was to make life better for communities, for families, for society, and for Canada as a whole.
Bromley's journey with the Joint Labour Committee on Human Rights, with those who came afterwards, Black Action Defence Committee, Black Lives Matter, so many others, is an important continuum in this long, long journey for a better world.
Who would have thought a young Black woman would end up being the Executive Vice President and the Secretary Treasurer of the Canadian Labour Congress? That we'd have a young Black woman who is President of the Toronto and York Labour Council. I can name them and not stop naming them, and that's because of the work that Bromley did. Inclusion and equity were so important to him, and he not only did the hard work to make sure that we had that, but he made sure that he taught the next generation what they needed to do.
Activism, movement building for social justice, equality and anti-racism, it's an ongoing process, and every generations of activists have to take up their own fight.
That's what I do. That's what I did at the ILO with Convention 190 to eradicate violence and harassment in the world of work.
Is for me, being the current president of the Urban Alliance on Race Relations, of which Bromley Armstrong was the founder in 1975.
It's hard to look at where we are and not be a little sad because of all the work that he did in the 1950s and 60s to try and get us to a place where equity and inclusion would be the norm. And we're now in 2022 and it still isn't the norm.
The challenges in front of Canadians in these next few years will be significant.
We see now what's happened across Canada with the fires and the floods. COVID ravaged many of our communities, and we know that It's young, Black, Brown, and Indigenous folk that are the worst and first affected by these.
The work that we're doing with pay equity and employment equity. 2022, we should have had that a long time ago.
In our education system, we have to root out systemic racism.
And that includes eradicating discrimination, racism, homophobia, transphobia, Islamophobia, ableism.
We have to continue to fight against what we see as the rising tide of white supremacism, Nazism.
We need to challenge the white supremacy within the movement and within the
I
society.
think what we need to remember is that we're bigger than them. And when we work together, there is absolutely nothing that we can't do.
We need all the white brothers and sisters, not just being allies, but co-conspirators. We need to shake the trees.
I want to give a special welcome to all those who have been nominated for the Bromley Armstrong Award. It's a real privilege. You know, I think back to the people who've received this award over these years. They are amazing leaders.
They have not stood by when wrong was happening. They have spoken out.
Some hold high elected office in our movement. Others have been doing the quiet work.
The invisible work in building a stronger, inclusive, and progressive labor movement.
I know Bromley would be very, very proud of all of you and welcome.
Thank you for your time, your leadership, and your commitment to building a strong, working class, multiracial labor movement and just society.
This is our moment, our movement.
A moment to make changes in the movement, changes that will matter, changes that will make sure that no one is ever left behind.
Continue Bromley Armstrong's legacy and maximize our practice of everyday resistance.
Let's get to moving and make what we need to happen, happen. And that only happens when we work in solidarity together. Our moment, our movement. Our moment, our movement.
Thank you, Bromley, for your work, and to Bromley's family who are here with us today. Thank you for joining us as we celebrate labor activists who, like Bromley, are working to create a more just society. We'd like to announce some raffle winners for the night. Everyone was automatically entered into the draw, and winners were selected at random using an online randomizer. Thank you for supporting this event, and congratulations to the following winners. We will email you to coordinate sending your prize. We'll do another draw later on. For tonight's speaker series, we've invited our moderator and panelists to address our moment, our movement. Also a reminder to get engaged in the chat. Najib Sufyan from LCS will be monitoring and will be able to relay a couple questions during the discussions later. I would like to first introduce our moderator, Yolanda B. Darcy, Director of Human Rights at the Ontario Federation of Labour. Yolanda B. Darcy was a French immersion teacher with the Toronto District School Board for 25 years. Her best years being spent in kindergarten. She is the former Vice President, Executive Officer, and organizer of the Toronto Elementary Teachers Local, and in her work with Ontario Education Workers United. She organized workers and the bill high participation, gaining victories through direct action. Yolanda enjoys writing and presenting women's programs with a focus on feminist leadership and allyship. She's a trained parliamentarian and sits on the executive board of the Toronto and York Region Labour Council, where she's a member and former chair of the Education Committee. Her passion is working to promote solidarity and social justice with a feminist, anti-oppression, anti-colonial lens for all. Yolanda's greatest accomplishment and biggest honor is being the single mother of a wonderful 25-year-old daughter and incredible 20-year-old son. Welcome, Yolanda. I would now like to welcome our panel, starting with Karen Brown, President of the Elementary Teachers Federation of Ontario. Earlier today, Karen was awarded the University of Toronto prestigious Global Leaders and Legends Award for Distinguished Service. Congratulations, Karen. Karen began her teaching career with the Toronto District School Board in 1993. She is also a registered early childhood educator and has extensive experience in the early years. Along with serving as Vice President of the Elementary Teachers of Toronto from 2003 to 2012, she served as a Chief Negotiator and Benefits Coordinator. At the provincial level, Karen has served on the executive of the Elementary Teachers Federation of Ontario since 2009. She's a governor and fellow of the Ontario Teachers Federation, an alumnus of the 2011 Governors General Leadership Conference, and a member of the Coalition of Black Trade Unionists. In 2017, Karen was named as one of the 100 most accomplished Black women in Canada. Karen is a daughter of the Middle Passage and hails from the land of wood and water, an abolitionist, proud mom, maroon, and an agent of change for educating women and girls. On August 17, 2021, at the ETFO annual meeting, Karen was elected president of ETFO. Karen is the first Black president to be elected to Provincial Teachers Affiliate Union in Ontario, and the first Black president to be elected to a Provincial Teacher Affiliate Union in Canada. Welcome, Karen. Mohammed Hashim is the Executive Director of the Canadian Race Relations Foundation. He has worked as a labor organizer and human rights advocate for over a decade and has dedicated his career to supporting equity, inclusion, and community empowerment. Mohammed is a member of the Board of Trustees of United Way Greater Toronto and a founding advisor of the Canadian Anti-Hate Network. Welcome, Mohammed. Kingsley Kwok is a registered respiratory therapist in the critical care and emergency departments at Scarborough General Hospital and co-founder of the Scarborough Health Coalition. He was president of the Ontario Public Services Employees Union, Local 575, representing over 1,000 allied health professionals at Scarborough Health Network and home support workers at Yi Hong Center for Geriatric Care. During the pandemic emergency, he fought to make more personal protective equipment available to workers and advocated for improvements in COVID sick pay, pandemic pay, and public ownership of long-term care. Kingsley is an executive board member of Labour Community Services and Toronto and York Region Labour Council. Thank you, Kingsley, for being here. And David Gurkha Kid was a community worker in the 1970s to 1990s, involving issues of homelessness, housing, health, unemployment, recreation, and anti-racism in the Spadina and Regent Park communities. He was an elected leader in the QP Municipal, Hospital and Housing Workers in the 1990s to 2017, where he engaged in issues of grievances, bargaining, anti-privatization, political activism, and anti-discrimination work, including member-to-member issues. He is also a workers' history facilitator and has provided educational workshops and labor history walks on Toronto's working class community and union history. Thank you, David, and to all our panelists for being with us today. I will now hand it over to Yolanda.
Thank you very much, Kevin. Good evening, bonsoir. As you heard, my name is Yolanda Budesi. My pronouns are she, her, and elle, and I'm so honored to have been chosen to be the moderator of this evening's fantastic program. Our theme, as you all know, is our moment, our movement. And I would like to ask the panelists to reflect on the following. We know that there have been many movements throughout history when the fight for human rights and social justice has captured attention and support, signaling what we hoped would be imminent change. However, for many, real change is yet to be realized. So the question I'm going to ask the panelists is, what do you think that we and our allies need to do or to do differently to make the most of our current moment? Then I'm going to ask Mohammed to answer first, please.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me. It's an honor to be back in the House of Labor. It's a place where I always felt at home. So thank you very much for inviting me. You know, to be honest, I'm gonna start off with a bit of a darker tinge on this one, because I think that, you know, from my vantage view, I've seen, you know, how governments are reacting over the last, 2 years in terms of how they prioritize racial justice and diversity and inclusion and created policies, made promises towards doing one thing or the next. And, when I talk to people in communities, they feel like, well, those were good promises. Where are we really though? And to many, that reality of promise was never materialized in any action. There have been some, but it's hard to make it tangible. Not only because policy as a whole takes time to be implemented and for that to have a reality check and impact, but because I think the sense of expectation from what governments or others needed to do and where the lived reality of people are, is the gap is still there. And so I say this because I think that gap, that motivation that existed 2 years ago after George Floyd was murdered is fading. And it's fading because I think obviously, with economic pressures, where inflation is going up, where paying bills becomes harder, governments are starting to tighten the belts. And therefore, those initiatives that may have received support 2 years ago and may be seen as secondary priorities. So my call to action to say what we need to do is not to lay rest on the laurels of what happened yesterday, but try to figure out what's innovative and what can actually be changed for tomorrow, and not to let up the fight. Because I think what is expected is that as things get harder, austerity measures are likely going to be coming across every government. That belt tightening is going to happen one way or the other, I think. And when that happens, typically issues around diversity and inclusion get thrown to the wayside. So this is really a warning call to say, we need to do things differently, 100%. And we'll talk about that as a whole. But I think that the moment that we're talking about is a fading one, and it may come back again, but I think we need to recognize where it's really at and commit to moving things forward, knowing that closing window.
Thank you, Mohammed. So, Mohammed, you characterized your description as a negative one, but it seems not negative or pessimistic, because it does seem that there is the request and the need to be forward thinking. But you mentioned that the moment, whatever it was we had, and I would agree that it probably was at its peak, unfortunately, with the death of George Floyd. I'm going to ask you, Kingsley, what do you think then? What can we do to make sure that the impetus that we saw before doesn't fade, especially, as Mohammed said, in light of the impending austerity that we know will be happening?
Thanks, Yolanda, and thanks, Mohammed, brother. There is I guess I'm always clinging to the glass half empty, that we are always hopeful for better. The last 2 years had frankly been very difficult, especially for workers who had a job and then became unemployed. No question. At the same time, we saw a rise in hate and racism incidents during those last 2 years and before. And some of the organizations came out and saying that, okay, we cannot be bystanders anymore. We have to offer help to those who were suffering, or we should report these incidents. And so whether it is organizations in America or in Canada, in Canada, we have the Stop COVID Racism website. That was organized, and we've had different university studies now that have studied the number of incidents since the last 2 years, and that kind of thing. Some of you might know that I was a candidate, or I had been candidates in previous elections, and I'll tell you something we can do differently is be more engaging and forceful in all the media and all the platforms that we have to keep the memory and to keep us vigilant in fighting racism. I brought up the fact that I was a candidate because by the way, I ran. I didn't win. I learned quite a lot, and one thing I did learn was this platform that was used by a whole new generation that I had not campaigned in, and it's TikTok. And so I got a young volunteer who kind of filmed some videos in the Victoria Day long weekend, and we had some fun about it. And then we kind of put it on the Tuesday after. We only put on 5 videos. I had never been on TikTok. Now I have close to 1,000 followers, and one of the 5 videos had over 170,000 views. And all the friends, all those so-called followers, they didn't follow me on Facebook or anything else. What I'm trying to say is we have a strong message to fight racism, to fight hate. Have we, have all of us kind of reach out to all the media in nowadays, because we know the regular news media, the traditional news media, is losing readership. How do we actually reach the younger generation, another generation that may not be exposed? Because we are now seeing children and even teachers out there saying, "Oh, I had never been taught this history before." And so I think we have to, whether it is ethnic radio, ethnic newspapers, TikTok, and other medium and platform to bring our message and keep it current. And I think that's what we can do differently.
Thank you, Kingsley. You touched on so many points. You talked a lot about media and how media can really shape the message, and specifically that we need to really get the younger generation and so go where they are. So TikTok and other things of which people of our wisdom might not be as accustomed. We won't say age, we'll say wisdom. But what would you say, David? What would you say to add to that? Because as Kingsley pointed out, although the question was taking advantage of this moment, and as Mohammed said, it is a bit of a pessimistic moment because, as Kingsley pointed out, we've got, and the pandemic really highlighted or really unearthed a lot of the hatred that we felt was there, but now it's become public. And with the convoy, we see that people seem to be very bold about it. Rises in acts of anti-Semitism, anti-Black racism, anti-Muslim, the crimes. That was just the anniversary of the London killings with the van and the whole family. So what would you say, David? What would you say, as well as what Mohammed and Kingsley said, what would you say we need to do now in this moment in our movement to make sure that this is always a priority?
Thank you so much, Yolanda. And it is like the others. I am really honored to be here today. Bromley Armstrong continues to be an inspiration for us all. So I think we're at a crossroads. I was around where we had other racialized individuals in the Toronto area killed by that happened after the Floyd events. And so I saw in that period some of the biggest mobilizations and contacts through family members, through individual contacts I'd ever seen. At the same time, we also have seen during the pandemic two things that I wanted to mention. One is right-wing opportunists took the advantage of, it was tough for lots of people to spread a message of hate, to spread a message of, exclusion. And this was, realized finally through the convoy. But the other thing that also, and that's just one of the right-wing movements that has been organizing during the pandemic. The thing though that also happened during the pandemic, and I'm speaking now as an elected leader in the union movement, is that we also, as many individuals across our community, in the same way. And what we need to do now is to rebuild the face-to-face contact with people and take on the issues of hate and the anti-Black racism that exists out there. And we need to remind our members, as we've done in the past, when you say something, doing something differently, I thought about it and I think the union movement and community groups have done this many times in the past. So in some ways it's different than the last 2 years, but it's reconnecting with a mobilization engagement activity of our unions to remind our members. The convoy never spoke on the working conditions of truckers, but that's what the union movement always does. We stand up for our members every day. Racism is one of the worst forms of favoritism. And while many benefit from favoritism, most workers I know abhor favoritism. And racism is an example of the way that is used by employers, by other people to make a division between us. Health and safety committees in a lot of work locations ceased operations during the pandemic. And we need to rebuild them with members engaged in them and to never forget that racism is one of the worst forms of toxicity in any environment, so that also gets addressed in our health and safety committees. And to never forget, and again, I'm keeping this short, but I'm just going to go back to one of our enduring legacies and one of our enduring slogans that some of us will never forget, that an injury to one is an injury to all. So to rebuild a movement, but we need to start to engage in the face-to-face connection with our individual members. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you. That's great.
There's technical stuff though. Oh.
I am fearful. It will happen to business. Power of our unions to be able to take a lot of chat. The incident happened in Buffalo and the shootings that we're seeing in the South always poisons us, it seems.
Yolanda, your internet was shaky, so we didn't hear you well. Maybe.
Okay, I'm sorry. Back on this.
Can you repeat the question for Karen?
Sorry, I just had to leave the audio on my other one. So you won't be able to see, it won't be lasting, but we'll see. I was commenting on what David had said about the powers of our union to affect change and the necessity of educating our members so that they know that racism is toxicity and that this is in fact a health and safety issue. In the chat, I'm seeing that people are asking to make sure that we will of course, discuss issues of the First Nations people of Canada. The idea also that we're seeing what's happening in Buffalo and the shootings. And we know that what happens in the South always comes up here. And there is a tendency, I'm sure we would agree, that we in Canada think, well, we're not as bad as what's happening in the US. And so I think, as Mohammed said, the urgency to do some of the things starts to fade because people think, okay, well, we're not that bad. We're not having open shootings, but we know that it's insidious. What would you like to add about that, Karen?
First of all, I want to say thank you for the opportunity to be here. As a young child who grew up in Kingston and immigrated to Canada, Bromley Armstrong is a household name, and it's so important to be able to continue his work. And when we were talking about, the issues that are in the chat, health and safety, Indigenous communities, we go back to the pandemic and the last 2 years where we saw racialized communities were disproportionately impacted by the pandemic, continue to be left behind when looking at issues of healthcare and access to services. And as we continue to look at what can we do differently, is to hold governments accountable. We just had an incident with the Minister of Education conducting and participating in a slave auction when he was in university, but there was a silence. There was a little bit of uproar around this issue, and then all of a sudden they sort of just let time pass, and it just slipped under the radar. And what we need to do differently is to continue to hold incidents like this accountable, hold our elected officials, hold community members who engage in this sorts of activities, because it's so critical when we're talking about structures and we're talking about policies and procedures. And if we have individuals who are responsible for carrying out these policies and procedures, enacting these types of behaviors, the sort of racism that's happening, workers aren't going to feel safe. They're not going to feel the ability to come forward when they're experiencing issues of discrimination, when there's a denial of access to things that they require based on a race, gender. The members of our Indigenous communities who are still trying to get safe drinking water. These are issues that there somehow has been developed I don't want to say complacency, but we've almost been desensitized. And what we need to do differently, we need to stop working in silos. We need to be working together more as communities and really build those coalitions. It's not just when an issue happens, it's just the Black communities out, or the Asian community, or the LGBT community. We need to come together, and we need to push these issues. We need to push some policies, and we need to consistently push policy changes. And we need to utilize, I think it was David who talked about someone talked about our young people. They are so social media savvy. They have tools and devices where they can create stories. They bring the stories to life, what's happening day to day. And I think we need to continue to do that, to keep those issues at the forefront, and to continue to disrupt the movement, continue to cause chaos. And that within education, we're seeing parents really wanting to disrupt the system. We haven't seen changes in regards to some of the impacts on racialized students in regards to performance and outcomes. And parents are saying that's not good enough, that anti-Black racism is prevalent, anti-Asian racism, Indigenous racism, and they're calling for embedding of curriculum and ideologies that would address this. So as part of moving forward, we need to continue to push these policies and to organize. The convoy was mentioned. They were organized very well. They mobilized, and they were able to fund. And I think we can learn a lot from the extreme right and some of this neoliberal activities in order to put our agenda in the forefront.
Thank you very much, Karen. We're going to move to the next part of our discussion, and again, encouraging everyone to keep the comments coming in the chat. And if we have any questions, we'll be sure to deal with those. The next part of our discussion, we're going to talk a little bit, of course, related to what we've just said, but it's important to acknowledge that we've come a long way in the fight for human rights and social justice. Again, our moment and our movement. Leaders like Bromley, Lloyd, Armstrong have modeled and paved the way forward. So whereas we had a bit more of a pessimistic take on the first, we're going to ask this time, what do you think we need to do to continue to amplify the gains, specifically the gains that we have made related to anti-racism for all of the communities that are suffering from that, again, including the Indigenous populations and what we would call, I guess, BIPOC communities. Mohammed, please.
We got to win. We have to win policy. I mean, the only thing that really keeps momentum in terms of moving things forward is moving things forward. And I think that's really important for us to make sure that we do that. For me, for example, I mean, like I'm working on a number of different fronts where I co-chair a task force on hate crimes in Canada with the RCMP, where we're creating national police standards. Because right now, to be honest, you know, if you go to the police expected to get a sense of justice from reporting a hate crime, the chances are, you know, relatively minimal. And that's even if you go to the police to be able to do so. And I think that's just not only the failure of the trust that the communities have towards law enforcement, but also the fact that we've kind of given up. And that can't happen. So we're working. I've been working significantly on hate crimes, particularly, but also I think we need to change the focus in terms of just talking about you know, institutions, which are important to point out in the racist practices that they have, and focus on impact of victims. Because right now, to be honest, we talk a lot about systemic racism, but we don't talk about what's happening to different communities. When we talk about hate, we talk about, you know, some communities, but when Buffalo happened, it was in the news cycle for 3 days, 4 days at most. I was honestly shocked about how visceral an act of anti-Black hate that was, and therefore, and the tremendous impact it had, not only there but here in Canada as well, and how quickly things moved on. You know, Janice made a point in terms of, you know, we need to be honest about how reconciliation is going and not going. I think that's incredibly important. I'll just share that, you know, there was you know, back at the end of March, I met a gentleman named Dwayne Yolanda from the Big Stone Cree First Nation up in Northern Alberta. And he was telling me that, you know, this year alone, in a reserve of 2,000 people, 20 people had successfully committed suicide, out of which 5 of which were between the ages of 15 to 20. I think, you know, right now Canada is telling a lot of people that you can be who you want to be, and telling others and making them believe that their life is not worth living. I think that reality is a lived one right now across this country. Last week I was in Winnipeg, and, you know, talking about reconciliation and with Indigenous community groups, and honestly, it's abysmal. I've never seen as much disappointment from the system, from people who are Indigenous. And I think that's a reality that not just, you know, the Indigenous communities need to grapple with, but all of us have a responsibility to tackle that as well. I really have to apologize. My wife got COVID yesterday, so I got my little guy that I got to give him dinner and into bed before 8 o'clock. I really apologize. I have to go, but I really wish you all a successful evening tonight, and I hope to remain in contact as we do this work together. Thank you.
Thank you, Mohammed, and we wish your wife all the best in her recovery.
Thank you.
Thank you. So Mohammed raised some great points. One of the questions that we ask, people talk about reconciliation, as we've heard, but it needs to be reconciliation. And when we talk about gains, it's important to highlight the gains, but also never forget all the work that needs to be done. I was shocked while canvassing for the election that just passed to hear some people who feel that the bodies that were found from the residential schools, that was a hoax, and that they, no matter all the experts that we have here in Canada, that somebody in Australia apparently had found that it was a hoax, and that people would like to cling to the most vile types of rumors. But when we focus again on the gains, Kingsley, what would you say are some of the gains and how can we help to amplify those and give people hope, please?
Let me unmute. Sorry, it's the bane of my existence. I want to answer the question, but I also want to speak about what Mohammed and Janice Gary brought up. We also have to maintain our fight to stop violence against Indigenous women. I think that part is also going to be continuing with us. To answer the question, Yolanda, I want to, is it quote or paraphrase John Lewis to get in good trouble. There was an article I read not too long ago about John Lewis, and there were 5 things that the article suggested. Always go out to vote. Is never too young to make a difference. Speak truth to power. Become an advocate in racial equity, and never give up. There is so much gains. Bromley started the work in the 1940s, and then and move on into his work decades forward. And we are now in 2022, when white supremacy is part of the lingo again. And so, is it because we have another generation coming up now, or was it always dormant, and then we need to always keep white supremacy in check, and we always have to say no? This is no way to go, right? I think we can't rest on the successes we had. We have to continue to say that we have a Charter of Rights, we have laws against hate crime, and we have to fight. And if they are not enough, and if we have to improve policies like what Mohammed is working on. We really have to educate the younger generation, and to just fight all kinds of racism and discrimination. Anti-Semitism is on the rise, and Islamophobia is on the rise. Anti-Black racism, anti-Indigenous racism, anti-Asian racism is all kinds. And so, is it educating the younger generation, or is it to be vigilant and call it out when it's folks in our own generation? And so we have to keep vigilant, and every year, like today, we have to remind ourselves that we still have so much more to go.
I sense a theme, Kingsley, in terms of the youth, and it's true. If we see things like the May 1st manifestations and the organizations that we saw, it really was youth who were leading that. And that is hopeful, because they are the ones, when we have gone, what we are doing now is setting the ground for them. But I think what we're hearing is that perhaps we need to move aside and allow them. They have become the leaders that we were wanting them to be, and allow them to do that with the right education. Lots happening in the chat. I'm going to ask David, what are you going to add about how we can amplify the gains that we've made related to anti-racism and hate, please?
Well, thanks for that question. And I first off want to applaud Labor Council's recent statement on gun violence that was issued at the recent council meeting, in terms of the events, the tragic events in Buffalo. But I think oftentimes north of the 49th parallel, we often forget how close to home gun violence is, and we need to still organize around that. I have a lot of faith that the next generation is going to do their work. For me, as a white person, white man, I see my role as talking to other white people, other white men about racism. And I think that that's where some of the conversations have to start and continue. I also, though, want to speak on some of the other matters that people have mentioned, because again, is still back to the basics of what injury to one is an injury to all. The anti-Asian racism has really taken off during the pandemic. For me personally, I never forget during the SARS pandemic, the last racist fight I had to break up was 6 youths taking on one Chinese kid on his own, and they were blaming him for SARS coming into our city. As others have mentioned, Islamophobia is still, we just had the anniversary of the tragedy of that family in London, Ontario, of how they were murdered by that person. And it is true that anti-Semitism is on the rise. Though I want to make it clear to everyone, anti-Semitism isn't, as some institutions have declared, standing up for Palestinians' rights in opposition to Israeli government policy and practice. Anti-Semitism is what is happening to the desecration of synagogues, to Jewish cemeteries, and the right-wing groups that spread the lies that there's the Jewish rich conspiracy that's running the world. That needs to be challenged. Then, of course, I'm glad that people have brought up the Indigenous issues, because again, as others have said, reconciliation is a road that we are still going to be taking a long way away, a long walk along. But I want to add a new one that I want us all to be aware of. With the recent re-election of this government, they have declared war on Indigenous people in Northwest Ontario right to free, prior, and informed consent. They are planning to build roads right through Indigenous territory in terms of accessing the Ring of Fire resources. And we need to stand. What they're going to do is criminalize dissent up there, criminalize people standing up for their rights and the land that they established through treaty. So again, we will have to be active. And the one thing I also just want to add at the end, I never forget that women still hold up half the sky, but often every day they never share the benefits that many of us men do. So we have a number of issues of oppression that we need to bring together. My term, and again, it may not be the best, but we need to build a wall of solidarity among us all. That's what's going to also assist the fight against anti-Black racism when we unite all these fights together, because again, the people united can never be defeated. Again, I really thank you for allowing me to participate in this important discussion.
And we thank you, David. Again, I'm seeing another trend. You said before that an injury to one is an injury to all. And we're talking about solidarity. And Karen had mentioned that what we need to do, and we can talk about intersectionality when we look at all of the issues, those of us who have multiple identities, or those of us, as Karen had said, we don't work in silos. There needs to be an application and the support and the solidarity from all groups and from allies. Karen, can you tell us some examples? Because we're still supposed to be talking about amplifying gains, but there is a rise in lateral violence and groups, instead of fighting what we could say is the enemy or the systems and the actual racism, that they're infighting. But can you give, you mentioned not working in silos. Are there examples that you can give us of how we have amplified the gains that have happened since Bromley Armstrong started this great work and beyond?
Thanks, Yolanda. That's another great question. And let me just maybe connect to some of our previous speakers, and then get to your question. We were talking about, you're hearing about truth and reconciliation, but there can be no reconciliation unless there's truth in regards to the realities of our Indigenous brothers and sisters on Turtle Island, what it's like to be Indigenous. And until we really address that head on, some of the myths about the children that we have found who in these graves, that won't go away. And part of that is with education. So there was a conversation, do we just call it out or do we educate? We have to do both, right? When we see it, we have to call it out, and we have to educate the next generation and the current generation around issues of racism, around issues of discrimination. And in order to do that, I mean, they're going to build the next group of solidarity, that intersectionality, because they have grown up. You know, hate is taught, right? And so you're gonna work on having people unlearn certain things and really creating another level of young people who view the world differently, who see our differences as something to be celebrated, embraced, and something to build on, something as part of our strength, and the strength that will enhance the labor movement. And when we fight, we win, right? And so we need to fight. One of the questions you asked is, what do you think we need to continue to do to amplify the gains made related to anti-racism? We need to continue to fight. We're tired, we're exhausted, we have really been deflated with governments who have not put issues that relate to racialized communities as part of the just recovery on as part of any sort of platform and any sort of agenda. And so that's another key thing. You talked about how do we looking at issues of lateral violence and how do we build solidarity? Well, that the common enemy is external, and that it's not internal, and that's part of the strategy to pit communities, to put groups against each other, as opposed to focusing on the issues and how they can work together to overcome those particular barriers. So when you're looking at issues of women's issues, not pitting different women against each other. So racialized women, it's white women, it's Asian women. You're a woman, it's a woman's issue. You're experiencing certain things at different levels, but coming together, not polarizing, to make change. I want to end on a positive note. Bromley, coming from Jamaica, better must come. Better must come with the movement. We have to be conscious to say we are able to make change, and it begins with each of us individually coming together with the collective power of the movement, the collective power of the people. That is where our strength is. When we saw, and I'm just going to wrap up quickly, when we saw the Pride Parade in 2016, and those young Black women shut down that parade, they resisted, they took charge, took power, and reclaimed their power and said, we need to be heard. These are issues that are happening within that community, and they made it a central point. And I think, some of those strategies need to continue. That's what Bromley did. He had sit-ins in Dryden. It's that same thing, reclaiming and taking over. And so some of those are some of the good strategies that we need not to be afraid to do. This is not comfortable work. This is not work that people can just there aren't any, what do I want to say? There aren't any safety nets to doing that. And I think when we realize the gains as opposed to some of the challenges, we're going to be able to slowly by slowly make some gains around this issue.
Karen, I'm going to put you on the spot one more time. I have two questions, but I ended with you for both, so I'm going to start with you for, we have to end by 7:36 because I was told we only had 40 minutes for this, but I think we have time for this. There's a comment in the chat, and I'm going to ask everyone to, but I remember a friend of mine who once said, kind of jokingly, that I don't see color. I just see everybody as shades of green. And then the tongue-in-cheek remark after that, but the darker shades of green have to sit at the back of the bus. So I would like you, and I know that working with teachers as we do, I know that in my job as an executive officer, I would have to counsel members who would say, but I don't see color. I treat all children the same. Can you comment on that? And then we have, with 2 minutes to go, I'm going to ask you to comment briefly, Kingsley to comment, and then we will, I'm going to give a challenge to everyone to write something in the chat. But Karen, what do you think about that, please?
Yeah, and thanks, Yolanda, another great question. And we hear that often. And that's a denial of your existence and a denial of your experience as a worker of color, as an educator of color. as the students that we see in our classroom. It's like if you had a child who had a disability, you wouldn't say, oh, I don't see that disability, because there are obstacles and barriers that they've had to have overcome to be successful where they are in the classroom. And it's the same thing. You don't see my college, you don't see the lived experiences. I say that at my office, the things that I've had to go through to be profiled while shopping, profiled while traveling, while Black, all the barriers and other things, the issues I have, concerns I have for my son. So not realizing that our lived experiences are different, and to recognize that, and to be able to understand that when you're working with students and to meet their particular needs. And I'm just going to speak from my experience that that Black child and that white child sitting next to each other, their journey to schools were very, very different. And that's the same with educators. We had a young male educator who had to report to his principal why he was late for work several times, because he'd be stopped on his way going to work because he was profiled. So he was being pulled over by police, and that's why he was late. So his journey was very different from that white teacher. And so you do need to see color, because our experiences are very different. And I think that starts with a conversation. Usually people think they're trying to be really inclusive and embracive, in embracing others, but really they're not recognizing your lived experience. And that's part of having courageous conversations and that education piece in regards to the skin that we're in, and how we move around, and whether you're Black, you're Asian, you're Indigenous, whether you're LGBTQ, those are the factors that people need to take in consideration.
So it sounds like you're talking about the difference between equality and what we're looking for is equity, because as you said, people don't experience the waters the same way. And it is, as you said, we see it specifically when we're dealing with students and when we're in the education sector. But I know that here in this labor movement, it's with workers and it's with people in our community and our society. And I do see that there's some good discourse in the chat. I have gone over time, and so I'm going to look to the fantastic organizers of this event to see, do we want to be taking some specific questions from the chat, or have we really covered it? Well, of course, we can never cover it all. I'm going to make the executive decision. I'm going to ask everyone, because I, as an educator, we didn't actually talk about, and we want to always leave, and we tried to leave. I'm sorry that I brought us down again. Tried to leave on a positive note. I'm going to challenge everyone to write one of the gains that you have noticed in society, even if it's very, very small, because one of the ways I think that we can amplify this is to, as Mohammed said, first of all, we need to win, but then we need to share those wins. So my first question said that we have had moments in the movement where we have had victories. So can you write some of those in the chat so we can all be inspired? And then I challenge all of you to, if you're on social media, share that in your social media, and then challenge people to get us some more wins. If you're not on social media, have those conversations. As Karen said, they might be difficult conversations. We call them courageous conversations, but that discomfort that you might have, that discomfort is how we know that change is happening. We have to get into good trouble. So I'm going to challenge everyone, as I thank all of the panelists, to write one of the victories that you have seen that we can amplify. So put it in the chat, and we can document it today of the victories that we've seen with this movement, and then we can celebrate those in this moment. Thank you to all the panelists, and congratulations to all the winners.
So Yolanda, I think the text message, most of it is, responded by the panelists, and they addressed all the questions, and I think they've been discussed. So they were aware of the questions that have been asked through the text message. Thank you for handling that.
Thank you to our panel for your insightful reflections. So we have a few more prizes to give away. Again, everyone was automatically included in the draw, and winners were selected at random. Thank you all again for your support. Congratulations to our final list of prize winners. We will get in contact with all the winners within the next couple of weeks. Thank you. We now come to the most anticipated portion of the evening. The Equity Committee of Toronto and York Region Labour Council and Labour Community Services established the Bromley Lloyd Armstrong Award in 2005 to commemorate the courage, dedication, and outstanding service of Bromley Lloyd Armstrong to the labour and human rights movements in Canada. The award recognizes the contributions that demonstrate outstanding commitment and leadership to those who have fought and propagated labor and human rights. Tonight, our recipients join the list of outstanding individuals we're proud to call our friends, activists, and labor family. Throughout the years and in the same vein, the award recipients are recognized for their contributions in equity, inclusion, and human rights. Special recognitions have also been presented, as you see here. This year, some of our 2021 Bromley Armstrong Award and Special Recognition alumni will be presented the awards to symbolically connect the journeys taken for the same cause. I welcome Leo Guo, John Cartwright, and Charlene Stewart as our award presenters for tonight. Thank you. Leo, I welcome you to present the first awards.
Sure. Thank you so much, Keith. And good evening, everybody. I'm super honored to be chosen to be one of the presenters for tonight's award ceremony. The first 2022 Bromley Lloyd Armstrong Award goes to Carol Wall, Unit 4 Local 87 MSONG. Carol Wall is genuinely a leader's leader. She not only exemplifies the attributes of integrity, accountability, empathy, humility, resilience, vision, influence, and positivity, she also mentors others in developing the same qualities. A rank and file activist with Southern Ontario Newspaper Guild, short for SONG, Carol became the Communications, Energy, and Paper Workers Union of Canada's first Director of Human Rights in 2000. A remarkable feat in a male-dominated union. She worked closely with members and leadership to develop and build consensus for adopting CEP's first policy framework on human rights and anti-racism. She also worked tirelessly on the Pay Equity Initiative. Being the first is not new to Carol. She was the first Black woman to become the Ontario Regional Director of the Federal Mediation and Conciliation Services, where she provided grievance and mediation assistance in numerous collective bargaining disputes in various industries. Her work involved designing customized joint workshops for unions and employers to improve labor relations between bargaining periods. In 2002, she was elected Vice President of the Canadian Labour Congress, representing workers of color. Under her leadership, the Workers of Color Caucus were cohesive and proactive in advocating for more equitable representation of BIPOC in leadership positions. In 2005, Carol led by example when she ran for the presidency of the CLC, gaining 37% of the popular vote in the face of significant adversity. A lifelong educator, Carol is a much sought after facilitator and speaker in the labor movement on strategic planning, organizational change, and equity training. She co-authored the book, Education for Changing Unions, published in 2002, which won Best Book related to the field of labor education from the United Association for Labor Education based in Chicago, Illinois. Carol has led by example, shattering the stereotypes and surmounting systemic barriers in white and male-dominated institutions. Always mindful of giving back, Carol is a longtime member of the Coalition of Black Trade Unionists. She served on the Ontario Federation of Labor Women's Committee and numerous boards, including the Pay Equity Advocacy and Legal Services Clinic and York University's Center for Research on Work and Society. Her presence and leadership have inspired many others to follow. As a feminist and climate activist, Carol sees challenging the dominant power structure as a respectful endeavor that demands speaking truth to power and standing firm on a platform of social, racial justice. It takes courage, tenacity, and integrity to push for equity, human rights, and social justice within the labor movement and the larger society. Everyone, please join me in congratulating Carol Wall. Carol, you are welcome to unmute yourself and say a few words, please.
Thank you, Liu. Well, I want to start by I join you from the traditional territory of the Mississauga and the Chippewa Nations, collectively known as Williams Treaties First Nation, which include Curve Lake, Hiawatha, Alderville, Scugog Island, Rama, Beausoleil, and the Georgina First Nations. I must say I'm honored and humbled at this award. And I must start by thanking my nominators, an amazing group of women who have got me through the pandemic with their love, their laughter, their tears, wisdom, and incredible strength. So I thank Winnie, Akua, Sandra, Carmela, Barb, Maxine, Charis, Yolanda, Janice, and Angela. The world is a better place for all of you being in it. I'd also like to thank, of course, the Equity Committee of the Toronto and York Region Labour Council and the Labour Community Services for establishing this incredible award to commemorate the critically important work, human rights work and social justice work of Bromley Armstrong by continuing not only to recognize those who continue this journey, but to inspire the next generation of human rights advocates and abolitionists. I'm blessed because I come from a strong, loving family that inoculated me from an early age to be able to withstand any form of racism and hate by always lifting us up and teaching us to fight against racism and against discrimination, not only for the Black community, but for all equity-seeking groups and anyone who was marginalized. We have researched and celebrated our family history of liberation through the Underground Railroad, escaping slavery. So we've always recognized in our family that we stand tall because we stand on the shoulders of our ancestors. That is why awards like this, to not only record, but celebrate our history is so important, because so often, not only is our history not told, it's not written, and it's erased. But I want to be clear that I don't do this work alone. None of us do this work alone. And that's why I love the labor and social justice movements, because we come together as community for collective action and for the greater good. So I feel honored to be joining my fellow award recipients tonight as our names are added to a list of trailblazers. But this award and even listening tonight has made me think of the important African principle of Ubuntu. I am only because we are. That is why when Liu was reading some of my accomplishment, I need you to know I couldn't have done any of that without the incredible supportive family and friends, many who are joining us tonight, and those who aren't are with us in spirit, because I am only because we are. That's the collective strength of the labor movement. And that's why it's so important to continue the kind of authentic conversations that the panelists had tonight, the call to arms that Muhammad gave us, all of the incredible, inspiring words that we heard, and how they made it clear that we have to continue the long haul work of dismantling systemic racism and discrimination. We all have a great responsibility, and we have the power to fight for and achieve true liberation for all, because until we are all free, no one is free, and we know that. So this is our moment. This is our movement, and together we can change the world. There is no more excuses. We have to roll up our sleeves. It's time to get this done, and I call on all of you to also become abolitionists, because this wave is where we have to end discrimination and racism and poverty once and for all. We can do it. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Carol. Congratulations again. Next, the 2022 Bromley Lloyd Armstrong Award goes to Vanessa Stobie of the Ontario Secondary School Teachers Federation, District 16. Vanessa embodies the values, courage, dedication, and determination of the late Bromley Lloyd Armstrong. She has worked tirelessly within her union and in the greater community to advocate and advance the rights of Black, Indigenous, and racialized people. As the Vice President of Ontario Secondary School Teachers Federation, District 16, Vanessa has worked tirelessly to dismantle anti-Black racism. She has taken steps to eliminate barriers Black people face and build bridges between Black communities and other communities. In the wake of the 2020 murder of George Floyd, Vanessa brought together Black community leaders and union leaders in York Region. The group had honest, gut-wrenching conversations about confronting and addressing anti-Black racism while building bridges of solidarity between community members and union leaders. She took a collaborative approach in organizing Black Youth York Region. A primary aim of Black Youth York Region is to provide a space for young people to learn to dismantle and challenge anti-Black racism and systemic oppression. The BYR July 2020 Unstoppable Youth-Led Online Panel Discussion was reported on in newmarkettoday.ca's online publication. Vanessa's commitment to BYYR's progress is evident in their much anticipated June 18th, 2020 Youth Leadership Conference. Her work in the community extends in many directions, most notably with the organization Parents of Black Children, developing relationships with unionized teachers and Black parents. On the labor front, with support from leadership and like-minded members, at Ontario Secondary School Teachers Federation District 16, a proactive systemic approach to dismantling anti-Black and systemic racism was embarked on by the team. Their work led to establishing an anti-Black racism executive officer as a full-time paid release position to be held by the person who identifies as Black. This position is now enshrined in the Ontario Secondary School Teachers Federation District 16's bylaws and constitution. Vanessa's tenacity truly exemplifies the spirit of Bromley Lloyd Armstrong and his willingness to work with allies to combat racism and injustice. Vanessa proudly accepts this award, but is unfortunately not able to be with us this evening and sends her regrets. Again, congratulations. And now I'd like to hand it over to John Cartwright. Hi, John.
Hi, all. Thank you, Liu. I'm honored to now present the 2022 Bromley Lloyd Armstrong Special Recognition Award to Sister Carolyn Egan of the United Steelworkers Local 8300. For more than 3 decades, Carolyn Egan has been a standout phenomenon in Toronto's social justice movement. She has been active and supportive of many social movements such as Black Action Defense Committee, the Coalition of Black Trade Unionists, and her own union, United Steelworkers Human Rights Committee. She's been a key leader in the pro-choice movement, not just in Toronto, but across this country, an anchor of the Toronto International Women's Day celebrations, and relentlessly fought for the rights of women, all workers, and LGBTQ2S+ people. In the early 1990s, Carolyn helped the Canadian Union of Postal Workers Union sisters fight the sexual harassment they faced in their workplace. Her resolve inspired women at CPW Gateway location to confront and take action against that harassment. She has pioneered practical anti-Islamophobia work and was recently instrumental in creating Toronto's anti-hate network. She has also led the way in international solidarity actions and the anti-war movement. Her energy and enthusiasm has been boundless, unstoppable, and yes, absolutely inspiring. Through her long involvement with and leadership of the Steelworkers Area Council, she's won the love and deep respect of hundreds of local members and their families. She's inspired and involved them in a host of campaigns and solidarity actions in Toronto, across Ontario, Quebec, Alberta, and the United States. Under her guidance, member-centered services such as Lifeline, the Injured Workers Program, and the Job Action Center have prospered and expanded. And under her guidance, the Steel Hall at 25 Cecil has been a hub for countless community events and organizations. 2.5 decades ago, Carolyn's crucial far-sighted involvement helped bring the University of Toronto support staff into the union fold, a force that includes several thousand women. By force of personality and her instinct for reaching out to and bringing together rank and file members, she has presided over the transformation of what was once a traditionally male-dominated, predominantly manufacturing and somewhat socially conservative union into a diverse, progressive, and action-oriented social force in Greater Toronto and for the steelworkers across this whole country. Everyone, please join me in congratulating Carolyn Egan. Carolyn, please unmute and say a few words.
Thank you so much, John, and everyone here tonight. I have no words to fully express how honored I am to receive this award, to be recognized by my sisters, brothers, and comrades in the trade union movement, the Toronto and York Region Labor Council that has been one of my homes for such a long time, a place where I've worked alongside so many of you in the seemingly unending battles for the profound change that we all know has to take place. We fight as trade unionists against the exploitation that we all face in our workplaces. But as people have been saying, we also know this is compounded by the systemic racism, the sexism, the homophobia, the ableism that affects so many of us, and that we have to struggle against over and over and over again in all of its manifestations. We, of course, have made steps forward, as people have said, recognizing the differences amongst us, working together, and using the collective power that we have as working people. and winning real gains. And these advances, when we make them, gives us the confidence to continue the struggle. And I really believe every step forward, no matter how large or how small, this is what keeps us going and makes us stronger to overcome the setbacks when they come, and they do. I've always appreciated what we have won through the efforts and hard work of ordinary people of so many backgrounds, but also recognize how much more we still have to achieve in order to win the fight for a world with dignity and respect that we're all so committed to. We know that profound racism and oppression of all sorts continues in society, and of course within our unions as well. We need only look at the nooses found in workplaces across the city, the lack of representation, the ongoing harassment and discrimination in our workplaces, as well as in the broader community, which have to be fought, and this is our task. And of course, today, as has mentioned earlier, the rise of the far right is amplifying this even further. The anti-Black racism, the Islamophobia, the anti-Asian hate, the anti-Semitism, the attacks on Indigenous peoples. The leaders of this movement scapegoating and trying to divide one against the other as they play on the anxiety and desperation so many feel. And that's why our work today is more important than ever and why we are so committed to it. I'm always an optimist, a person who sees the glass half full. And when you look back over the last few years, seeing the millions marching worldwide with Black Lives Matter, the huge support for Indigenous peoples, about the children and the unmarked graves, the demonstrations against Islamophobia and anti-hate, Asian hate. And just a few years ago, when a member of ours, a steelworker brother, Mark Austin, was walking with his white wife in Dentonia Park in the East End of Toronto, they were attacked by white supremacists because they couldn't stand seeing a Black man walking with a white woman. And when he went to the police said it's a he said, she said. And immediately within days, a rally took place at that police division. The Danforth Jewish Network, an imam from the local Muslim community, the United Church minister, Coalition of Black Trade Unionists, Black Action Defense, our union, of course, the Steelworkers, but the Labor Council and so many others in community groups, hundreds gathered within days and forced the police to put those charges forward, which they had refused to do. And to me, this is the concrete representation of the solidarity that we've been building. A small action, but it says so much. And I feel therefore very, very deeply that we can continue to move forward. And personally, I've grown so much over these years, learning from so many of you as we've worked together, comrades always. And I would like to thank those who nominated me, the sisters, brothers, and comrades I've worked with over the years, and those I continue to work with today, who I have so much respect for. The Labor Council, obviously, the Steelworkers, my union, the International Women's Day Committee, the Reproductive Justice Movement, OCAC, Good Jobs for All, the IS, and all of the fighting groups that I've been privileged to be a part of. I thank you all from the bottom of my heart for this award and promise that I will do all I can to continue the struggle alongside you. Thank you so much. It's such a privilege to work with you all. And I'm supposed to show the award. So solidarity forever, brothers, sisters, comrades.
Congratulations, Carolyn. You're truly a woman of steel. I now welcome Charlene Stewart to introduce our Union Award recipient.
Thank you very much, Keith. As last year's inaugural recipient of the Union Award, I am proud to share this honor and present the 2022 Bromley Lloyd Armstrong Award to the Ontario Secondary School Teachers Federation, District 16. OSSTF District 16 has been proactive in taking decisive action to promote an inclusive and equitable society. The urgency to address systemic racism became more acute during the pandemic. COVID-19 exposed what many already knew about the prevalence and impact of anti-Black and systemic racism. Many public calls have been made for tangible actions to end anti-Black and systemic racism. In addressing racism and its devastating results, OSSTF made sure its steps were specific, implementable, and systemic. Achieving goal-oriented actions could not happen without strong leadership. Scott West, Executive Officer, Vanessa Stobie, First Vice President, and Blair Vowles, Communication, Political Action, and Excellence in Education, championed a systemic change within their local. Their work resulted in OSSTF District 16 members voting to incorporate an anti-Black racism, acronyms ABR, officer in their constitution and bylaws. This endeavor was no simple accomplishment. D16 budgeted for the ABR officer to be a full-time paid release position to ensure the changes were more than the words written in their constitution and bylaws. The local's vision is to ensure its members, students they instruct, and people in the communities they serve are growing towards becoming more inclusive and equitable. Recognizing the urgency and need to address racism, the ABR officer has started working towards aiding and supporting Black, Indigenous, and people of color BIPOC members. This work included developing critical anti-Black and anti-racism education workshops to support District 16 entire membership. A Black caucus has been established to support members who self-identify as Black, many of whom have committed or commented on struggles they face working for the school board and the need for peer support. The bold steps taken by OSSTF District 16 under the leadership of Scott West, Vanessa Stobie, and Blair Vowles are a concrete example of how change makers can embark on systemic change in the labor movement. It is clear that the journey is not over and more work is still being done. However, a path has been paved for others in the labor movement to follow. Congratulations, OSSTF District 16. Receiving the award, I welcome Blair Vowles, Chair of the Communications, Political Action, and Excellence in Education, Scott West, the Executive Officer, and Carmela Goodridge, Anti-Black Racism Officer, to unmute yourselves and say a few words.
Thank you very much, Charlene. That was a gracious and honor to have you speak on our behalf, and you encapsulated it great. The first thing I'd like to do is speak on behalf of Vanessa. I know she cannot be here tonight, but I'll just start by saying a statement. She could not be here tonight this evening as she is in British Columbia as a participant in the Governor General of Canada's Leadership Conference Tour, which is a great honor for her to be attending that as well. Vanessa's done great work for our local and across the district and in the greater labor movement as well. She's also asked us to share the following quote on her behalf. If you are free, you need to free somebody else. If you have some power, then your job is to empower somebody else. Vanessa is honored and blessed to receive this award. She will endeavor to move forward and to making change in different ways and ensure she stays grounded in empathy, respect, transparency, and action. Personally, I'm honored to be here tonight as part of OSSTF District 16 teachers and occasional teachers, and would like to thank the Labour Community Services and the Toronto York Labour Council for this recognition, as this work in our organization and across the broader Labour community is necessary, needed, and long overdue. I'd now like to throw the Zoom mic over to Blair Vowles, our amazing Communications and Political Action Committee Chair, for further words.
Thanks so much, Scott, and I'll catch that Zoom mic over here. And I'd like to thank Charlene as well, once again, for those incredible words and for expressing the journey that our district went through so well. I am going to read a little bit, and my apologies for reading from a piece of paper, but for those of you who know me, I tend to ramble unless I do so otherwise, and I do not want to have to do that this evening to our wonderful attendees. So on behalf of the Ontario Secondary School Teachers Federation of District 16 York Region, we would like to thank the awards gala, but most importantly, the Equity Committee of the Toronto and York Region Labour Council and the Labour Community Services for putting together these awards, not only for the this year, but for the past years, and hopefully for many, many, many years ahead. I would have to say right now that's an incredible honor, not only on behalf of the three of us that are here tonight representing District 16, but an incredible honor for our entire district as well, of over 3,000 members who not only include teachers and occasional teachers, but also PSSP members, which are the professional service leaders within our district as well. When I think of the theme, our moment, in our movement. It reminds me of 2 years ago when our group, kind of a group of not only elected members, but members at large as well, came together to say, this is the moment right now. This is the moment where it is much needed to make some movements within our own local. The movement needed to occur many, many years past, but it needs to be right now that we actually put some action to that and move past words and start to see some excellent steps forward within our local. As Charlene did such a great job speaking to our journey in creating this role within our district, I don't want to move too much more past that or repeat some of the incredible work that she did in mentioning that. But I do find it appropriate to pass the mic off to Carmela Goodridge. And Carmela Goodridge is the first anti-Black racism officer. I'm so happy to say this, and it's so great to say it out loud for many times as well, for the Ontario Secondary School Teachers Federation of District 16. And she will speak to some of the amazing work that she's done already and many next steps which need to occur within our district as well. So thank you, Carmela, and I'll pass it off to you.
Thank you, Blair, as I accept the mic. I've written down a statement as well, so I don't veer off script, but as Empress Carol Wall, congratulations, stated, Ubuntu, meaning I am because you are. I am here because of Vanessa Stobie. I am here because of Blair Vowles. I am here because of Scott West and the many supporters and allies who participated in the creation of my role. Now, the anti-Black racism officer has afforded me the opportunity to disrupt, dismantle all forms of hate, racism, and discrimination, as well as providing opportunities for learning for our members, support for our members while liaising with our employer and strengthening vital partnerships with community members. In all honesty, I'm going to be real, this is hard work. This is heavy lifting and the work is never ending. But because of this role, I and the D16 executive members have changed the constitution of OSSTF-FASO, whereby each bargaining unit in the province of Ontario will have an equity, anti-racism, and anti-oppression officer come September 2022. I'm not playing. So this revisioning of our union is exactly what Mr. Bromley Lloyd Armstrong modeled and believed when he stated, if you accept the role and become an agent of change, the rewards will be beyond measure. Already, the rewards for our generation and for the generations to come are really becoming palatable, and I'm able to see them. So with that, I thank you all, and Ashe, thank you.
Let's give everyone a warm round of applause. Congratulations to Carol Wall, Vanessa Stobie, Caroline Egan, and the Ontario Secondary School Teachers Federation District 16, Blair, Scott, Vanessa, and Carmela. Amazing work. You make us proud to be part of the movement. To conclude our event, I would like to hand to Andrea Babington, President of the Toronto and York Region Labour Council.
Thank you very much, Keith. Yes, this was amazing. Just listening to everyone and reading the chat, and I want to start off, and this is resonating with District 16, ending with the quote, "I am here because you are." I appreciate that, and that's something that I will also take with me. And I want to move on by say first, I would like to say congratulations again to all our awards recipients for this evening. Hearing about each recipient's journey to get to where we are today is nothing short of a lot of work. And I also want to echo a few of the participants' responses in the chat and also the panel's discussion. I just want to take some time just to share a little bit of some of those, what have we been hearing. We are tired, but we have to keep going. We need all hands on deck to support our leaders. It's time to reactivate the shop floor discussion. Amazing. Being in the line of activism, we all know how difficult the hurdles were, how unsure we were at the end of many days. We all know too well how much determination it takes to stay in our line of work. I congratulate everyone here this evening for your support in acknowledging that the work of Bromley Armstrong, our award recipient, and so many others are choosing to tackle head on. When faced with what seemed like the impossible, there are people who choose to take on these challenges because it improves everyone's lives. I am here because you are. And that is it in itself, it's worth it. As the audience said, this presentation was well said and remarkable. With confirmation, I want to thank everyone on behalf of the Equity Committee of the Labor Council and the Labor Community Services for their lead in prioritizing this work and acknowledging the hard work activists do each day. I also want to say to you, have a wonderful evening. Have a good night. Thank you very much.
We would like to again thank everyone for joining us this evening, and to all our sponsors for your support. This event was made possible by the efforts of the Equity Committee of the Toronto and York Region Labour Council and staff of Labour Community Services. Special thanks goes out to the Bromley Outreach Team, Marcia Lopez, Najib Sufyan, Judith Logan Junop, Joan Spalding Williams, Sharon Simpson, and Olivia Liu, as well to those who made the Bromley video possible, produced by Nadine McKinnon, and alumni participation from Winnie Ing, Mary Clark Walker, Nigel Brief, and John Cartwright. Good night, everyone, and stay safe.
Sabi mo Kayo monkey, pula, itim, pula, dilaw, berde, puti. Kayo monkey, pula, itim, bukaw, dilaw, berde, puti. Kayo monkey, pula, itim, bukaw, dilaw, berde, puti. Kayo monkey. Grabe! Iba't ibang mukha, iba't ibang mata. Tingnan mo ang bagal, iba't ibang lahi, iba't ibang galaw, iba't ibang pananaw. Mas makulay ang mundo kung tayo'y iba't iba. Just biba. Okay lang na biba, ikaw biba, dahil ika'y nag-iisa. Just biba. Okay lang na biba, ikaw biba, dahil ika'y nag-iisa. Just biba.
Thank you.